Kiev 945 CE. A delegation of Drevlian men has arrived at the city gates. They are the best men of their tribe, sent by their prince. They have come with a marriage proposal for the widow of the ruler that they have just killed. Her name is Olga. She is the regent of Kievan Rus, ruling on behalf of her 3-year-old son. She has been in power for approximately 5 minutes. The Drevlians murdered her husband Igor, and now they want her to marry their prince so that they can control the heir and absorb the entire kingdom. Olga receives this delegation graciously. She tells them she is honored by the proposal. She tells them she wants to receive them with a ceremony, so they should return to their boats and wait. Tomorrow she will send for them, and they will be carried into the city properly with all the honor they deserve. The Drevlians go back to the boats, happy as can be. That night, Olga has her people dig a ditch, a big, huge trench. The next morning, the Drevlians are carried into the city in their boats, as requested, straight into the trench, and they are buried alive. Olga looks down into the trench and asks if they are finding the honor sufficient. She then sends word to the Prince Mal that she is intrigued by his proposal, but that the delegation was not impressive enough. She will need his very best men. So he sends his very best men, and she burns them alive in a bath. And she is just getting started. So what did they do, and why does it make sense to them? Here is what you need to know about the Kievan Rus. In 945, the Ryukhin dynasty, Olga's husband's family, had built their power by controlling the river trade routes running through what is now Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. Furs, honey, wax, slaves moving south to Constantinople, silver moving north. The whole operation depended on extracting tribute from the surrounding tribes, including the Drevlians, a Slavic people living in the marshes and forests to the northwest of Kiev. The system worked like this. Once a year, the prince made a collection circuit. He showed up, the tribes paid, everyone understood the arrangement. It was extraction, but it was a predictable extraction. And predictable extraction, you could kind of plan around, violates that arrangement. He came, he collected an unusually large tribute, and then he decided it was not enough and came back for more. The Drevlians had already paid. Coming back was not collection, it was just taking. Their leader, Prince Mao, told his men, if a wolf comes among the sheep, he will take away the whole flock, one by one, unless he be killed. So they killed him. Igor's death is actually corroborated by the Byzantine source, the 10th century chronicler Leo the Deacon, who wrote that Igor was captured by the Drevlians, tied to tree trunks, and torn in two. That detail may be embellished by Leo, who had a taste for dramatic violence, but it tells us the killing was not quite an assassination. It was absolutely a statement. Now, the Drevlians have a problem. They have killed the prince of the most powerful state in the region. His heir is 3 years old. His widow is sitting in Kiev with an army. The logical move from where they are standing is to neutralize the widow by marrying her to their prince and absorbing the succession. It was not an insane plan. It was a plan you make when you thought Olga was the standard issue royal widow who needed a man to tell her what to do. And they were so very wrong about that. Here are the four. The Drevlians made 4 separate attempts to deal with Olga diplomatically. She responded to each of them in a way that the primary chronicle, our main source, presents as escalating and methodical, which it is, but it is also, as we will get to, doing something else at the same time. First, embassy. 20 of their best men arrive by boat. She has them carried into the city in the boats, as requested, into a trench that her people had dug overnight, and are buried alive. She asked, according to the chronicle, whether they were finding the honor to their liking. The second embassy. She sends word that this delegation was not sufficient, as she needs his noble lords, his very best men, to escort her properly to the Drevlian capital. Prince Mal, who does not yet know what has happened to the first group, sends them. When they arrive, Olga invites them to bathe after a long journey before presenting themselves to her. They go into the bathhouse, she locks the doors, and burns it down. With third act, she sends word to the Drevlians that she is coming to the place where her husband died to hold a funeral feast at his burial mound, as was customary. She arrives with a small escort. The Drevlians join her. They drink. They drink a lot. The primary chronicles say that when the full inebriation had ensued, Olga ordered her men to slaughter them, 5,000 Drevlians, according to the chronicle. Take that number as a number the monk writing it down needed rather than a census. But something happened at this feast and they died. We don't know how many. Okay. Fourth act. She marches on is the Drevlin capital with an army. She besieges it for a year. Drevlins hold out. They offer tribute. They ask what she wants. She says 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each household. They give her the birds. Her men tie rags soaked in sulfur to the feet of each bird and light them. The birds fly home, because pigeons do that, to their nest. The city catches fire simultaneously from every rooftop. The chronicle says there was not a house that was not consumed. The Drevlians, who try to flee the city, are met by Olga's army. The survivors are killed or enslaved. A few are left to pay tribute. It is over. The Drevlians are finished as a political force. Olga has secured the dynasty. She rules as the regent for the next 15 years. Now, everything I have told you has come from a single source, the primary chronicle, also called the Tale of Bygone Years. It is a chronicle compiled in the early 12th century by monks at the Kievan Caves monastery. The lead authors are traditionally named as Nestor and Sylvester. They were writing about events that had happened roughly 150 years before their time, which means they were working from oral accounts, earlier records that had not survived, and their own institutional needs. Now, those institutional needs actually matter a great deal here. The monastery depended on the Rugkid dynasty. The monks were writing royal history for a ruling family that needed legitimacy. In the Rugkid dynasty, legitimacy rested significantly on a chain that ran through Olga, because Olga converted to Christianity and her grandson, Vladimir, made Christianity the official religion of Kievan Rus in 988, and that conversion is the founding act of Orthodox Christianity in that region. So the monks needed Olga to be 2 things simultaneously. They needed her to be terrifying enough that her eventual conversion would look like a miracle. And they needed her to be admirable enough that the dynasty she protected looked worthy of God's favor. The primary chronicle calls her wiser than all men. It is also her burying people alive in a boat. Both of these things can serve the same narrative function. The more monstrous the pagan Olga, the more miraculous the Christian Olga. The monks were not making things up out of nothing, but they were shaping what they had into a story their dynasty needed. And here it gets really interesting, because there's a second layer underneath the whole entire frame here. Historian Heidi Sherman published an analysis of Olga's account that points out something the straightforward revenge narrative misses entirely. Look at the structure of the 4 acts again. The Drevlian envoys buried alive in their boat, the second delegation burned in a bathhouse, the 5,000 killed in a funeral feast, and then the birds. Sherman argues these are not just 4 escalating acts of revenge. They are a sequence that mirrors Scandinavian pagan mortuary ritual. Olga's family background is described in the chronicle as Scandinavian. Her name is a Slavic form of a Norse named Olga. The Rudkid dynasty itself was founded by Viking warlords, and Viking funerary practice included specific ritual elements that appear in order in Olga's revenge. So the boat burial. The dead were often interred in boats with a ritual sacrifice burned alongside them. The first embassy was buried alive in their boats. This was not just an execution, it was a funerary offering. The bathhouse burning. Ritual cleansing by the fire before the funeral. The second delegation is invited to bathe, purification, and then burned. The funerary feast with slaughter. Scandinavian funerary practice included a feast at the gravesite with attendant sacrifice. Olga holds a funeral feast at Igor's burial mound and massacres the guests. The bird fire. Sherman notes the fire itself is a ritual element in Scandinavian death rites, and that burning the city completes the sequence. So, what the monks wrote as revenge, Sherman argues, was also a pagan widow's mortuary ritual for her slain husband. She could not perform suttee, the practice of a widow dying with her husband, because her son was too young to rule without her, so she performed the ritual another way. The Drevlians became the sacrifice. Now here is the counter-argument, because there always is one. We have the chronicle. We cannot get behind it to see what the monks left out, softened, or invented. The mortuary ritual reading is compelling, but is also speculative. Because we are pattern matching a 12th century monk's account of a 10th century event against North's ritual practice that we know from other sources. The patterns fit. Whether they fit because the ritual actually happened or because the monk was working from oral tradition that had already encoded the ritual into the story, or because we are very, very, very good at finding patterns when you look for them. It's really unclear. But we can say this. Something real happened in 945. Igor was killed. Military retribution followed. Olga secured the dynasty. She ruled for 15 years and did it effectively enough that her grandson became the most powerful ruler in the region. The bones of the story are real. The flesh in those bones was shaped by people with strong opinions about what it needed to mean. This is not unique to the story. This is just history in general. So, what she did with the rest of her life, let's look into it. After the Drevlians, Olga reformed the tribute system. Instead of the annual collection circuit that had gotten Igor killed, she established permanent trading stations staffed with her own officials, who'd levied standardized taxes. Historians consider this the first recorded legal reform in Eastern European history. Then she traveled to Constantinople. According to the Chronicle, Emperor Constantine VII was so struck by her beauty and intelligence that he proposed marriage. Olga pointed out that he had just served as her godfather in her baptism, which meant that they were now spiritually related, and that marrying your goddaughter was illegal under Christian law, as he surely knew. The emperor said, "Olga, you have outwitted me." She returned to Kiev with gifts, a blessing from the patriarch, and no husband. She spent the rest of her life trying to convert her son and failing completely. He told her, "My followers will laugh at me." She died in 969 and arranged for her own funeral in the Christian rite, with no burial mound and no feast. She has spent 30 years getting as far as possible from the pagan world that she came from. The Orthodox Church eventually canonized her, equal to the Apostles, the first native saint of Kiev and Rus. The same woman who buried the ambassadors in a trench and asked if they found the honor sufficient. Her grandson, Vladimir, converted to the entire kingdom in 988. The Chronicle credits Olga's example as part of what he did. A lane of causation runs from the trench dug in Kiev in 945 to the founding of Russian Orthodox Christianity. Whether you find that beautiful or deeply strange probably depends on your relationship with an institutional religion. Now there's a gap on the shelf, just an observation. Here is something that surprised me while I was researching this episode. There is no dedicated English language scholarly biography of Olga of Kiev. Not one. She appears in chapters. She appears in articles. She appears in broader histories of Kievan Rus and studies of Christianization of Eastern Europe, but nobody writing in English has written her book yet. The scholarship exists in Ukrainian and Russian. In English, she is a chapter. For a woman who was the first female ruler of one of the largest states in medieval Europe, who carried out what historians consider the first legal reform in Eastern European history, who outmaneuvered Byzantine Emperor, and who canonized as equal to the apostles. That gap is worth noting. I'm not going to pretend to have solved that problem in a podcast episode, but I am going to put the primary sources in the show notes. The chronicle is in English translation. You can read her in your own words, filtered through a 12th century monk who needed her to be a monster and a saint at the same time. Make what you will of that. Now, you might be asking, why am I talking about this right now in 2026? The thing that keeps jumping out to me about Olga is the gap between what she was doing and what the people watching her thought she was doing. The Drevlians thought they were managing a widow. They were wrong 4 times in a row. The Byzantine Emperor thought he was receiving a foreign dignitary he could charm into a political marriage. She had walked out with exactly what she came for and left him nothing. The monks who wrote her story thought they were building a conversion narrative. They may have also preserved, without knowing it, a record of pagan ritual that otherwise would have disappeared entirely. Nobody who encountered Olga seems to have understood what they were dealing with until it was too late to do anything about it. That is not a 10th century problem. That is it for this episode of The Fire. I am Dr. Angie, and this is the Snarkives. The sources will be in the show notes.